Murder or killing splits the soul. This is reinforced time and time again. But despite this fact, we see it happen again and again throughout the Harry Potter series, and not just by the bad guys. It makes sense for Death Eaters to kill. It's clear where their moral compass lies, and I would presume that killing, and the subsequent impact on their soul, is the price they're willing to pay to achieve their cause. But this topic also raises a much bigger question, because if there are such serious consequences tied to taking a life, how do the good guys do it? Molly Weasley does it, Dumbledore does it, and even Neville Longbottom does it. Today we'll be diving into all of that and more as we discuss the implications of murder in the wizarding world, specifically in the context of the good guys. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Now, it's no surprise that the bad guys kill people in Harry Potter, and the spell most commonly associated with this act is Avada Kedavra, a spell with really only one singular purpose: killing. And because Avada Kedavra has such a strong association with murder, it's often the only spell considered in this context. But if you think about it for a second, there are many other spells that can achieve exactly the same thing. Avada Kedavra is particularly bad in that there is no nuance to the spell. It's basically all or nothing, and because it's alleged to damage the soul of those on the receiving end of it. It's for these reasons that it's considered unforgivable. But if your sole purpose, see what I did there, is just to get rid of someone, there's no reason something like Bombarda Maxima wouldn't do the job, and in a seemingly much more brutal fashion, I might add. And here's the thing, no matter what spell you use to do it, murdering someone is going to inadvertently impact you as well, whether it's Avada Kedavra or Accio. Killing, or more specifically murder, inherently renders the soul unstable. There's evidence of this in the books. The soul is supposed to remain intact and whole. Splitting it is an act of violation. It is against nature. But how do you do it? By an act of evil, the supreme act of evil, by committing murder. Killing rips the soul apart. Murder is exactly what Voldemort leveraged to destabilize his soul and encase fragments of that soul in Horcruxes, a calculated choice and a necessary evil in his quest for immortality. But I would imagine that for most dark wizards, the thought of disrupting the delicate balance that sustains their soul would likely be far less appealing. In Voldemort's case, the act of tearing his soul apart was crucial, but for the majority of dark wizards, and especially good wizards, I'd imagine that such a deliberate mutilation of their own essence would be overkill on 99.9% of occasions. The soul, as described by Dumbledore, is meant to remain intact, whole, and undisturbed, and tearing it apart, even unintentionally, leaves behind an instability that cannot be repaired. And it's precisely this reasoning that explains why the Death Eaters didn't use Avada Kedavra more. But if that's the case, how did the good guys murder so many Death Eaters at the Battle of Hogwarts? How did Neville get away unscathed after slicing Nagini, a human maledictus, in half? And how did Molly Weasley remain unscathed after basically blowing Bellatrix up? This is where we get into some nuance. Because while the series often uses the word killing very broadly, what seems to actually matter here is something more specific: murder. And those two things are not necessarily the same. Murder implies intent, malice, and most importantly, a conscious, cold-blooded decision to end someone's life. But killing can happen under very different circumstances, like war, self-defense, protection, or even mercy. Snape kills Dumbledore because he has to, but does that mean his soul was ripped apart? I mean, he hardly had a choice. If all killing automatically shredded the soul, then a number of characters on the so-called good side should have been spiritually ruined by the end of the series. But that doesn't seem to be what Rowling is suggesting. Instead, the real damage appears to come from murder specifically, the kind of killing rooted in evil intent. And that distinction is incredibly important, because it helps explain how someone like Voldemort could deliberately weaponize murder to create Horcruxes, while other characters, even when responsible for death, don't appear to suffer from any of the same magical consequences, at least not that we can see. Molly Weasley's triumph over Bellatrix is hardly murder. "What will happen to your children when I've killed you?" taunted Bellatrix, as mad as her master, capering as Molly's curses danced around her. "When Mummy's gone the same way as Freddie." "You will never touch our children again," screamed Mrs. Weasley. Bellatrix laughed, the same exhilarated laugh her cousin Sirius had given as he toppled backward through the veil, and suddenly Harry knew what was going to happen before it did. Molly's curse soared beneath Bellatrix's outstretched arm and hit her squarely in the chest, directly over her heart. Bellatrix's gloating smile froze. Her eyes began to bulge. For the tiniest space of time, she knew what had happened. And then she toppled, and the watching crowd roared, and Voldemort screamed. Molly's actions were entirely justified, and there's no reason that she would have murdered Bellatrix had she not just tried to murder her daughter and threaten her family. She made a decision to protect her family, and in this context, there's no reason that her soul would become destabilized. And Snape's killing of Dumbledore atop the astronomy tower isn't murder either. Snape gazed for a moment at Dumbledore, and there was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face. "Severus, please." Snape raised his wand and pointed it directly at Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra! A jet of green light shot from the end of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore squarely in the chest. Harry's scream of horror never left him, silent and unmoving. He was forced to watch as Dumbledore was blasted into the air. For a split second, he seemed to hang suspended beneath the shining skull, and then he fell slowly backwards, like a great rag doll, over the battlements and out of sight. Snape's killing wasn't done out of malice, nor for pleasure. It was agreed upon, and in a strange way, it was merciful. A third example of this distinction is with Neville Longbottom and Nagini. In one swift, fluid motion, Neville broke free of the body-bind curse upon him. The flaming hat fell off him, and he drew from its depths something silver, with a glittering, rubied handle. The slash of the silver blade could not be heard over the roar of the oncoming crowd or the sounds of the clashing giants or of the stampeding centaurs, and yet it seemed to draw every eye. With a single stroke, Neville sliced off the great snake's head, which spun high into the air, gleaming in the light flooding from the entrance hall. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville is directly responsible for killing Nagini, decapitating her with the sword of Gryffindor. But again, this isn't a malicious action. It's simply what Neville knew was necessary in order to bring an end to the war. Neville took a life, yes, but context is important, and this specific example is completely different from what we would typically define as murder. It isn't killing for killing's sake. With all of that said, I do think it's worth mentioning that even though the good guys would have been completely justified in killing during the Battle of Hogwarts, many still opted to just stun. In many instances, stunning or otherwise incapacitating a victim without killing them is a completely reasonable way to achieve the same goal. They also pretty much had free rein to use the unforgivable curses if they chose to do so. They weren't formally legalized before the battle, but under the corrupt Voldemort government, it didn't really matter because A, the law wasn't enforced, and B, Voldemort's forces were using them whenever they wanted to. "What you've got to realize, Harry, is that the Death Eaters have got the full might of the Ministry on their side now," said Lupin. "They've got the power to perform brutal spells without fear of identification or arrest." It's also worth mentioning that, as abhorrent as they are, the Unforgivables were legalized at one point during the First Wizarding War, as Voldemort's forces were simply becoming too powerful and they needed to even the playing field. And even despite this unofficial green light to perform unforgivable curses in the Battle of Hogwarts, many still chose not to use them. Back to the original question, what happens when a good wizard uses Avada Kedavra? Well, it shouldn't make a difference. The spell itself is designed to kill, yes, but based on everything we've looked at, it becomes a little clearer that it's not the spell that matters most, but the intent behind it. It's not about how you kill, but about why you kill, and that's what truly defines the gap between killing and murder. Before we close up this topic, there is one more angle I want to explore, and that's the perspective of the other side. If intent is what separates killing from murder, then who or what determines whether that intent is righteous or not? Neville's killing of Nagini can be considered righteous because it served the greater cause of the good guys and helped to end the war. But who's to say that a Death Eater, operating under their own clearly defined ideology that they firmly believe in, isn't doing the same thing when they kill someone on the other side? From their point of view, their actions are justified, as they're fighting for what they see as the correct version of the wizarding world. I think that ultimately the difference seems to come down to how that intent is expressed. When we look at characters like Voldemort, one of the patterns associated with his killings is that they're deliberate, repeated, and often unnecessary. There's virtually no elements of self-defense or necessity, and killing, to him, is used as a tool to gain power and control. So even if both sides believe in what they're doing, the key difference is that one side primarily kills when it's required, while the other is willing to kill as a default solution. And that seems to be where the series draws the line between killing and murder. So how do good guys kill people? The answer is whatever way they want, as long as it's justified and ultimately necessary. And that about sums up the video. I think there's honestly a ton of other ways you could dissect this topic, so I'd be curious to hear what you all have to say in the comments section down below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live